This is Turd Flinging Monkey for TFM News. I'm going to be responding to some older articles that I was made aware of recently. One is from 2011 and one is from 2014, but they both focus around the central theme of the legal system in China. So the first article is called China's Divorce Law, dubbed Law That Makes Men Laugh and Women Cry, by David Emer from October 30th, 2011. The second article is from the New York Times, January 29th, 2014, by Kim Lee, called Abuse, Fear, and Shame in China. So in the Telegraph, in 2011, it talks about how the Chinese government basically overturned divorce law, favoring men instead of women. I just want to read this. I want you to soak in the juicy, delicious irony of it all. So keep in mind this article is from 2011, but it says, quote, since August 13th, when China's Supreme People's Court reinterpreted the country's marriage law, many of the women leaving marriage registry offices like the one in Chongyang have more than just the end of their marriages to bemoan. According to the new law, residential property is no longer to be regarded as jointly owned and divided equally in the event of a divorce. Instead, whoever paid for the apartment or house is the legal owner and gets to keep it in its entirety. Later on, it quotes a woman saying, now she is homeless. Quote, my ex-husband bought the apartment before we were married, so under the new law, I'm not entitled to anything, says Mrs. Yang. No, you're not. Go fuck yourself. So the question is, what caused China to change these laws? Now, in another earlier TFM news video, I talked about how Japan is throwing men under the bus, doubling down on gynocentrism, trying to prop up their economy. Someone listened to reason, the same reason that I brought to my video, someone in China got. So here's what it says. Quote, among Mrs. Yang's generation, the 18 to 30 age group, and in the major cities, around 1/3 of all marriages fail. So 1/3, it's only 33%, that's much less than the West. But it is not just the young and metropolitan middle classes who are walking away from wedded bliss. In the first quarter of 2011, the biggest rise in divorces was in the southwestern province of Sichuan and eastern Shandong province. I'm probably butchering those names, but whatever. The article continues, quote, yet the way the Supreme Court is trying to stem the rising tide has ignited a furious debate about the status of women in a country where, according to Mao Zedong's famous quote, women hold up half the sky, as well as highlighting the still significant wealth gap between the sexes, unquote. All right. So the reason why these laws were changed to favor men was to lower the divorce rate. Fancy that. China realized that women were leaving their husbands in order to get those cash and prizes, and then changed the laws to favor the men who pay for everything to stop all these women skipping out and taking all their husband's shit. And then it closes with talking about the significant wealth gap. See if this sounds a teeny weeny bit familiar. It says, quote, it doesn't take into account a woman's contribution to the family, and especially the raising of children, she said. In order to take care of my son and give him the best possible environment to learn in, and to allow my husband to concentrate on his work, I gave up my job 2 years ago to be a full-time housewife. Everyone in the family has benefited from that. My son, my husband, my parents-in-law, but I don't see any recognition to that in the new law, unquote. You had one child. You quit your job to raise one child. She even mentions the in-laws. So, and I know in Asia, they actually have this whole, like, extended family home thing. So, it doesn't say, but I can imagine the in-laws were probably living in the house, too. So there were multiple adults that could have watched one child. Why the fuck wasn't she working? I don't know. I mean, I don't know a lot about Chinese culture. Their food is delicious. But other than that, I'm not a huge expert on Chinese culture. But this just smacks of entitlement. This woman wants to be a stay-at-home. How much does a nanny earn? Probably not that much in China. That's what the market value of her being a stay-at-home mom is. A lot of people object to this, but the market value of a good and service is the most objective way to measure how much that service is actually worth in comparison to other goods and services. It's not perfect, but the free market takes a lot of information and makes it easily intelligible. If a daycare worker or a nanny or a maid makes not that much money, like 20 to 30,000 American a year, that tells you how much that service is worth. The husband's pulling down 6 figures, and the wife is a stay-at-home mom making the equivalent of what would be a $30,000 a year job. That doesn't equal half. That doesn't equal half his shit. I mean, just imagine that. Imagine you hired a nanny to help raise your son. She lived in the house for like 5 years. Once the kid went off to school, you fired her. Told her your services are no longer required. My son's a little older. He's going to school. We're going with a part-time service. And then she sued you for half your shit. That would be insane. Fucking insane, because you were paying her the entire time she worked there. She's not entitled to half your shit. Well, those years that she was a stay-at-home mom, she was living in a house rent-free. That was her payment for being a stay-at-home mom, whatever work she was doing. Probably not a lot. I'm sorry. Well, I'm not sorry. You're a fucking gold-digging whore. The article continues, quote, the 36-year-old and her 10-year-old son are now living with her parents. She has no cash to buy a new home, even though the apartment in Beijing she lived in with her husband is valued at 2 million RMB or 200,000 pounds. Quote, my husband's parents bought it when we married. It's in my husband's name, so he and his parents-in-law are saying that under the new law, I am not entitled to half of it, said Mrs. Zhang. And this next part is hilarious. She says, quote, my lawyer thinks I can get maybe 200,000 RMB or 20,000 pounds based on money I paid towards the mortgage. That's ridiculous because I think the effort I put into the marriage is priceless, unquote. This is typical female entitlement. And this is, a Chinese woman. So all you guys thinking like, oh, I'm going to go to Asia. The women there aren't gynocentric. They're not hypergamous. These words coming out of this whore's mouth are the exact same words that would be coming out of a Western woman's mouth. The only thing that's different is the laws aren't as bad. The women are exactly the same. I made a video about this, my guide to Nawalt. All women are like that. In China, it's just not as bad because the laws aren't as bad. But the women, the female nature, is universal. These are the words you would hear out of a Western woman's mouth if the laws were different. If the laws weren't so stacked in her favor. The article continues, quote, a major reason why the new law is regarded as unjust by most women. Again, all women are like that. Most women regard this law as unjust because it actually objectively favors the person who pays more money into the marriage. Anyway, I'm sorry, let me back up. A major reason why the new law is regarded as unjust by most women is that in China, men or their parents traditionally buy the family home. Indeed, many women will refuse to marry until that happens. So whose fault is that, ladies? You demanded your husband buy you a home as a condition of the marriage. And then you demand half of it. And now that the law doesn't give you half, you think the law is unjust. Fuck you. Maybe you should have brought a little bit more to the table. But no, you just think you're entitled to half a house that you didn't pay shit into. Oh, because the priceless services of squeezing a baby out of your vagina and making sure it doesn't die while your husband pays all the bills? It is such a custom that tying the knot with a man who doesn't own a property is known as a naked wedding. But as house prices have accelerated, this is now a widespread perception that some women have been marrying solely because they know it will guarantee them the right to half the home's value if they divorce. So, hypergamy, it's universal. It's universal, gentlemen. It continues, it was in order to challenge that convention that the Supreme Court changed the law back in August. Let me just stop there. So these women's hypergamy was getting out of control, and the government, because it's China. It's not like the West. China stepped in, they saw the problem, and they're like, whoa, these bitches be cray. Let's scale it back a bit, let's pull it back. And the women are fucking losing their mind, because now they don't get half a free house. It continues, quote, the general idea of the new law is to protect the property owner, i.e. the man. The Supreme Court doesn't want people to get married just because they can profit if they divorce. But the social security system in China doesn't really exist, so we have to consider how to protect the people who are going to be disadvantaged in a divorce. Fuck you. Yeah, don't get married for money. How hard is that, ladies? How hard is that? Don't marry a guy with the sole intent to divorce him and take his shit. Oh, it's so unfair, it's so discriminatory. Fuck you, you gold-digging whore. And this is the best part, the absolute best part. Is this paragraph. It says, quote, in some cases, men who already own a home have been told by their fiancés that they refuse to have children or care for their parents, the traditional duties of wives in China, unless they are registered as the co-owner of the property before they marry. Doing this is the only guaranteed way to ensure they are legally entitled to half the home. Holy shit, guys. How big of a red flag is that? I'm not going to have your children, and I'm not going to take care of your family unless you guarantee me that if I leave you, I get half your shit. I mean, if that isn't a big screaming flag saying, kick me out now on my ass, I'm a gold digging whore looking for cash and prizes, I don't know what is. I don't care how hot she is. I don't care how nice her tits are, how good the sex is. That is some grade A gold digging. I mean, any man who's like, okay, where's the paper? Let me sign. You are a fucking idiot. You probably deserve half your shit being taken away. If a woman pulls that shit with you and you go along with it, my God, where are your balls, man? Where are your balls? So I have one more article to talk about, which also has to deal with China. This one is about domestic violence. This one's from the New York Times, written by Kim Lee. Now, the article starts off with a narrative format. It's about a woman who was beaten by her husband, who goes to the police, and the police really just don't give a shit because it was her husband, not some random person on the street. So it starts off saying, quote, I was trying to file a report against my husband for assaulting me, but as far as the police were concerned, no crime had occurred. After an afternoon of pressing the police to acknowledge the crime and failing, I went home and posted a picture on Weibo, a microblogging platform, showing only my injured forehead, hoping that some friends among my 23 followers would respond to a cry for help. So let me stop there. So here we have a woman who got her forehead hurt in a scuffle with her husband. The police didn't do anything. So, like many feminists, she took to social media to try him in the court of public opinion. And you're thinking, wait a minute, in China? What the fuck is this Chinese woman? This sounds like something a Western woman would do. Well, and you would be right. See, this woman who's writing this lived in China with her husband, but she herself was American. So that pretty much tells you all you want to know. In another paragraph, it says, quote, my now ex-husband is a prominent Chinese businessman, famous for a chain of English language schools that we built together. You didn't build shit. I guarantee you didn't build shit. I don't know what your role was, where you were sucking his dick while he was writing the checks, but you didn't build shit. Anyway, quote, I'm an American who has adopted China as my home. Our story was played out in the media. There you go, trying a man in the court of public opinion when you don't get what you want from the government. Sorry, let me go back. Our story was played out in the media, leading to widespread attention on us, and more importantly, on the cause of domestic violence. In the 2.5 years since the attack, I have partnered with the United Nations and the Beijing Domestic Violence Organization to foster awareness of the problem and help victims. In the next paragraph, it reads, the All China Women's Federation reports that nearly 25% of married women in China have experienced domestic violence. End quote. Let me stop there. 25% have experienced domestic violence. Well, according to the 2001 CDC, and this is a very famous pie chart I've used in several videos, it talks about the violent to non-violent ratio. And according to the CDC, in the West, only 23.9% of relationships are violent. And out of that 23.9%, 50.3% are non-reciprocal, while 49.7% are reciprocal, meaning both parties are going at it. There's no victim, it's just two people beating the shit out of each other. And in the non-reciprocal category of 50.3, 70.7 are perpetrated by the woman, hitting the man and the man not defending himself, while 29.3% is the man hitting the woman and the woman not defending herself. Thus, in the West, women are actually more violent than men, because they're responsible for far more of the non-reciprocal violence. However, notice that in China, 25% of women have experienced domestic violence, and in the West, it's 23.9%. Now, I don't know how the reciprocal versus non-reciprocal violence thing breaks down in China. I would imagine it's more or less 50-50. And the reason why it's 50-50, not 70-30 like it is in the US, is because in the US, the man is presumed guilty in domestic violence. If a woman calls the cops and says you hit her, it doesn't matter if she beat the shit out of you and you were defending yourself, you're going to jail because you have a penis. Now in China, they don't have that law. However, in a gynocentric society like we have in the West, men are punished for defending themselves, thus they don't. Thus, when it comes to non-reciprocal violence, women are 70% of the problem and men are less than 30%. In China, I don't know what it is, but I do find it interesting that she quotes this shocking statistic, 25% experience domestic violence, only 1% more than what we have in the West. But toward the end of the article, it says, China needs better domestic violence laws. Only a smattering of local courts are able to issue protection orders against abusive husbands. I mean, in the article, it even says, quote, faced with the prospect of a lengthy divorce that could end up costing women her home and her child, is it any wonder that prisons are full of women who attack their husbands with axes and fruit knives rather than rely on the law to protect themselves? What the fuck? So she's acknowledging that the prisons are full of women trying to murder their husbands with weapons. And then she has the fucking balls to talk about how the laws need to change to punish men who fucking tool their wives up a bit with some fists when they're getting attacked with knives? What the fuck? The rest of the article is just her talking about the need for national action. And the thing is, it's retarded. She's a Western woman writing in the New York Times about how the law needs to change in China. China doesn't give a shit about what the New York Times thinks. And the fact that women are murdering their husbands, and she acts like I want you to process this. This woman is seeing the fact that women are murdering their husbands as a call to action to protect women. And you side with the women as the real victim. It's like this Hillary Clinton shit. Like, when women murder their husbands, clearly the woman is the real victim. I mean, it's that level of overt, palpable gynocentrism that just goes so far beyond the pale of common sense. Yeah, I don't know what this Chinese guy was thinking marrying an American woman. What the fuck, dude? Seriously, you really couldn't find a better woman? At least China seems to be backing their men because they realize, the Chinese economy is just taking off. The Chinese government realizes that they need their men. If they're going to have a prosperous, growing economy going forward, they can't throw their men under the bus to please a few shrieking harpies and a feminist movement. Fuck that. They need their men because they're the producers in their society. It almost feels like in Western civilization, we've been so prosperous for so long. We reach a point where we think we've advanced as far as we're ever going to advance. Well, China's not there yet. They're still growing. They're not ready to throw in the towel and just resign themselves to collapse like the way the West is. And good for them. Good for you, China. This is Turd Flinging Monkey signing off.